Twitch waiting for a website to load.
No.
Like, come on already. It's 2024, right?
Right.
Well, today we're going deep on something most people never think about, but it's the backbone of a snappy online experience: connection pooling.
Absolutely crucial, especially these days when everyone expects things to load instantly.
Speed is king.
No question.
So I was checking out this article, Boosting Database Performance, and it really hit me. Every little thing we do online, loading a product image, scrolling through social media, it's a ton of back and forth communication with a database.
Right, like a digital handshake for every single interaction.
And all those handshakes add up.
Big time.
Yeah.
They create latency, those delays that drive users crazy.
Which is exactly what connection pooling solves.
Ex-
But how do you even test something like that? I noticed the article mentions using a function called .pgsleep.
Yeah, PG sleep. It's a way to intentionally introduce delays.
Wait, slow things down on purpose? Why?
It's like a stress test for your system. You want to see how it performs not just under ideal conditions, but when there are hiccups.
Makes sense because, let's be real, internet connections aren't always perfect.
Never.
So you're simulating those real-world delays to see if your setup can handle the pressure.
Precisely. It's like taking your car off that smooth test track and onto a bumpy road with potholes. You need to know it can handle the real world.
Love that analogy. Okay, so once you've stress tested with PG Sleep, the article dives into these three settings: min connections, max connections, idle timeout.
The tuning knobs.
Like fine-tuning a race car. Right?
Exactly. You're trying to find that sweet spot for optimal performance.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Not at all. It's an ongoing process of monitoring, tweaking, and optimizing.
And that's where benchmarking comes in, using tools like K6, JMeter.
Essential tools for the job. Benchmarking is like taking your finely tuned car for a spin on the track, seeing how it performs under pressure.
Pushing it to the limit.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The UGBDB docs article also talks about these delay functions, but for a different reason. Think of it less like mimicking real-world lag and more like zooming in with a microscope.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about really getting into the nitty-gritty, seeing how each tiny step in the process performs.
So it's more about control during testing than mimicking reality in this case.
Yeah, exactly. You want to isolate and analyze specific parts of the code. Now, on a slightly different note, we had this article about Go, and it dives into something called dedicated connections. Have you heard about those?
Get dedicated connections. Not really rings a bell.
It's like having a VIP lane for those really critical database operations, separate from the general connection pool.
Okay, so if connection pooling is like a highway, this is the express lane.
Sort of, yeah. Think about something like a financial transaction, where you absolutely can't afford any interruptions or data mix-ups.
High stakes, for sure.
You want that operation to be completely isolated, happening as one atomic unit. That's where dedicated connections shine.
Atomic meaning.
It either completes fully or it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah.
No room for half-finished business or data going haywire.
Gotcha, like when you hit save on a document. You don't want half of it saved and the other half vanishing.
Precisely. It's all about maintaining that data integrity, even if something unexpected happens.
So with connection pools, dedicated connections, transactions, how do developers keep track of all this in a real-world application?
It's a juggling act, for sure. They need to carefully consider when to use each tool, finding that balance between efficiency and keeping things isolated when needed.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You need to choose the right tool for the job, kind of like a mechanic.
Exactly. And remember that benchmarking we talked about earlier?
With K6 and JMeter and all that.
Yep. That's crucial here, too. You need to test different scenarios. See how your application handles the pressure with different connection setups. It's like those stress tests they do on bridges and buildings, but for your code.
Making sure it can withstand the weight of, say, 1 million users all at once.
Exactly. Now, going back to the Yugabyte article, they really emphasize using these delay functions like PG sleep, but for testing purposes.
Yeah.
Didn't we already cover that?
Yeah, but I think they were talking about simulating real-world internet hiccups earlier, right?
Right, but they also mentioned something called white box testing, where you use those delays to really dissect how the code behaves at each step.
So it's like instead of just watching the whole dance performance, you slow it way down, focus on each individual move, see how it all connects.
Exactly. It's about gaining a deeper understanding of the inner workings.
This is making me realize that optimizing a database is about way more than just writing efficient code. It's about understanding timing, interactions, the whole system's dance.
You got it. And that's what makes it so challenging and rewarding.
Absolutely. So connection pooling is just one piece of the puzzle, but a pretty fundamental one, right? especially as our world relies more and more on data.
For sure, it's a key ingredient in building those snappy, responsive applications that we've all come to expect.
It's crazy how something as seemingly basic as managing database connections can make or break the user experience.
You know, they say, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
And connection pooling. Well, that's one detail you don't want to overlook.
Speaking of details, there's one more article I wanted to touch on. Is that one from Developers Coffee? They actually walk you through how to implement connection pooling in Go, code and all.
Nothing like seeing it in action. Wow,
Yeah.
really brings it home.
Totally. And it highlights how it's all about resource management, making sure you have enough connections ready to go.
But not too many.
Right, like finding that
Yeah.
balance.
Exactly. You don't want to overload the database either.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly. So, looking back at all this, what's sticking with you as a key takeaway?
You know, it's just amazing how much complexity goes into building even the simplest apps these days.
It's easy to forget when you're just clicking a button, but there's a whole world optimization happening behind the scenes.
And connection pooling is just one piece of that, right? But a crucial one.
Absolutely, especially as we rely more and more on these data-driven applications.
For sure. Well, this has been eye-opening. Really makes you appreciate the work that goes into creating a smooth user experience.
It's a team effort, for sure. Developers, DBAs, everyone plays a role.
That's a great point. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners who might be inspired to dive into some optimization of their own?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things. And most importantly, measure the results. See what actually moves the needle for your application.
Love it. Data-driven optimization.
Always.
Awesome. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into connection pooling.
My pleasure. Until next time.
And to our listeners, if you want to learn more, check out the show notes for links to all the articles we talked about. Until next time, happy coding.